As Christmas's gentle snowfall silences Brooksville, an elderly, solitary billionaire resides within his grand, empty manor. He's been deeply wounded by the treachery of his wife and children, who plot to seize his fortune. In a moment of profound despair, he encounters 5 spirited orphan children in the park. He follows them to their humble abode, their innocence and genuine warmth deeply moving him. Compelled, he decides to offer his assistance. But when his newly drafted will is unveiled, his entire family is left in utter shock by its contents. Before we delve into this poignant tale, share with us your location in the comments. We're always eager to connect with our viewers. Heavy snow danced like hushed secrets beyond the towering arched windows of Whitmore Manor. Each delicate flake descended with quiet indifference, settling upon the intricate iron gates and the dormant rose bushes that lined the extensive stone driveway. Inside, golden chandeliers bathed an impossibly long dining table, polished to a mirror sheen, in a deceivingly warm glow. But this warmth was a facade. At the head of that desolate table sat Charles Whitmore, 70 years old, once a tall, broad-shouldered man, now diminished by the passage of time and sickness. His formerly vibrant silver hair was meticulously combed, though noticeably thinning at the crown. His face bore the distinct marks of affluence, refined contours, surprisingly smooth skin for his age. Yet the profound hollowness beneath his eyes betrayed a man once surrounded, now accustomed to profound silence. His tailored gray cashmere sweater draped loosely on his slender frame as he idly poked at the untouched roast lamb before him. A deep, rasping cough unexpectedly racked his chest, violent in its intensity. He reached for the linen napkin, raised it to his mouth, then paused, his gaze fixed on the faint crimson stain hidden within its white threads. He uttered not a sound. Soft footsteps padded across the marble floor. It was Henley, the head butler, a man in his 60s, more a permanent fixture of the house than its very furnishings. Quiet, dependable, loyal, Henley placed a small vial of pills beside Charles's crystal water glass. "You overlooked these, sir," Henley offered gently, his tone always just formal enough to command respect, yet never quite reaching warmth. Charles nodded, swallowing the pills without a word. After a moment he looked up, his voice hoarse. "Did Evelyn call?" "No, sir." "Lucas? Clarissa?" Henley hesitated. "No word. Miss Clarissa's assistant did send an email, something regarding a late board meeting." Charles scoffed, a low sound escaping his lips. "Of course." He picked up his fork, then set it down again, finally pushing the plate away. "Remove it. I'm not hungry." Henley remained silent. He cleared the dish, eyes downcast. Charles leaned back into his tall leather chair, gazing out at the bay windows. The snow had intensified, now swirling thick and dreamlike. After a while, Charles retrieved his phone and studied the screen. A tap, then another. Calling Evelyn Whitmore. Voicemail again. Calling Lucas Whitmore. Straight to voicemail. Calling Clarissa Whitmore. It rang, then a brisk, clipped voice answered. "Dad, what is it?" "I'm literally about to present the Q4 pitch. Can it wait until tomorrow?" There was a brief silence. "It's Christmas Eve," Charles said softly, as if seeking to reassure himself more than her. "Yes, and we're attempting to finalize a deal in Singapore. Significant time difference, remember?" She snapped. "I'll call you tomorrow. I promise." He stared at the phone's dark screen long after the call ended, his jaw slightly clenched. He leaned back, his eyes fixed on the ceiling for a long moment before slowly rising. His movements were deliberate, not sluggish, but measured, as if burdened by an invisible weight. In the study, the fireplace still emanated a soft glow. Charles approached the sideboard and poured himself a glass of brandy. No ice. He stood before the mantel, his gaze resting on a framed photograph, positioned solitary between a pair of antique candlesticks. A young family. Charles, perhaps in his early 30s, his face fuller, laughing unrestrainedly. Evelyn by his side, cradling a newborn swaddled in pink. Lucas, a toddler, reaching for a candy cane. The Christmas tree in the background was humble, artificial, but radiant with tiny lights. His fingers lightly brushed the frame. A faint smile, involuntary and fragile, touched his lips. "That was the finest damn Christmas I ever had," he whispered. "You couldn't afford heat, but you gifted me a wool scarf you knitted by hand, Evie," his voice fractured. "I wore that ridiculous scarf for years. Another cough racked him. He steadied himself on the mantel, then slowly sank into the leather armchair opposite the fire. The dancing shadows of the flames flickered across the walls. No music, no tree, no voices. He reached into his sweater and retrieved a folded, creased and faded piece of paper. It was a child's drawing, a naive scribble. "Happy birthday, Daddy. Love, Clarissa." A red crayon stick figure holding a balloon in the snow. He remembered it instantly. Christmas night. Clarissa had insisted her birthday gift was his birthday card. Charles glanced at the clock. Midnight. The day had passed. He was officially 71 and no one had remembered. He exhaled slowly as if releasing something profound. His hand relaxed and the drawing drifted to the floor. The fire crackled softly, but it was the silence of the rest of the house that resonated most profoundly. Outside, the snow continued its relentless, indifferent descent. Inside, a man sat bathed in the glow of a magnificent fire in a house brimming with everything except what he truly yearned for: someone to remember. Charles Whitmore stood alone at the revolving glass entrance of Whitmore Logistics, the collar of his charcoal overcoat turned up against the biting wind, a black wool scarf drawn snugly around his throat. The previous night's snow still clung to his shoulders, slowly melting beneath the building's golden illumination. He hadn't announced his arrival. No chauffeur, no assistant. He hadn't visited the office in nearly 6 months. No one anticipated him. That was precisely the point. He stepped inside. The lobby was cathedral-high, modern, stark. Marble floors reflected the steady hum of activity. Secretaries, executives, young men in sleek suits tapping on tablets. No one even glanced up. The founder had become merely a figure on the wall, his portrait hanging behind the receptionist's desk. A younger Charles shaking hands with the governor, smiling as if he still believed in something. The receptionist, a girl no older than 25, briefly looked up. "Can I help you?" "Oh, Mr. Whitmore," she half stood. Should I call Mr. Lucas or—" "No," Charles stated flatly without slowing his pace. "I know the way." Elevator doors chimed softly behind him. The numbers ascended. 32. The executive floor. As the doors opened, he was met not by accolades or greetings, but by an echoing silence. The receptionist's desk on this floor was deserted. Half the lights were off. The double doors to the boardroom down the hall were shut, lights glowing within. Charles moved quietly, his shoes almost noiseless on the thick navy carpet. He heard voices. "He hasn't said anything about his health," Clarissa's voice, sharp and composed. "He doesn't have to," Evelyn replied coolly. "You've seen the reports. He's losing weight. He can't climb stairs without help." Lucas interjected, his voice businesslike, almost too eager. "We have the proxies. 81% of the board supports us. All we need is the new trust to be signed, and the transition begins by Q2. He's the founder, certainly, but the market demands stability. This provides it." A pause, the rustle of papers. "And what if he refuses?" one of the shareholders asked, hesitant. "He won't," Evelyn asserted. "We'll make it appear as if the decision originated from him. Early succession due to health. A public statement from the family. Some legacy PR campaign. He'll sign it. He always capitulates when the family pressures him." Charles stood frozen mere inches from the door. Something in his chest, anger, heartbreak, something far older than both, tightened like a vice. He didn't breathe. He didn't blink. Inside the room, Lucas continued, "I've already spoken with Zurich. The family trust can be restructured. The majority of Class A shares will transfer to the executive trust. We'll have legal authority to override any major asset sale," Clarissa added. "We don't need to push too hard. We just need him to sign before the end of the quarter. Frame it as a precaution. Stroke his ego. He still believes he matters." The room chuckled, a polite yet venomous sound. A pen clicked. "Let's conclude this," Evelyn said. "We've waited long enough." Charles took one step back, then another. The hallway suddenly seemed longer, darker, colder than moments before. His hand briefly touched the wall to steady himself. He walked to the elevator without a sound. The descent was slow. He stared straight ahead at his reflection in the polished doors. His face was devoid of expression, but his eyes had transformed. Whatever glimmer of hope had flickered within them the previous night was now extinguished. Back on the ground floor, the receptionist hastily stood up. Did you wish me to inform them you were? No, Charles said firmly. Not today. He stepped out into the biting cold. Later that evening at Whitmore Manor, Henley met him at the door. The butler studied the older man's face, pale and silent. Shall I bring supper, sir? No, I'm not hungry. Would you like your evening medicine? No. Henley hesitated. Shall I light the fireplace? Charles looked past him toward the grand staircase, the profound stillness of the house engulfing him whole. Not tonight. He moved toward his study. Just before the door closed, he turned slightly, almost as an afterthought. Henley, starting tomorrow, if Evelyn or the children call, inform them I am not receiving visitors. The door shut with a soft but definitive click. Behind its silence, Henley stood for a moment, his shoulders heavy, before walking away. Upstairs, the family portrait gazed down from its ornate frame. Downstairs, in the very heart of the house, Charles sat alone once more. This time not as a forgotten old man, but as a man who finally grasped the true extent of his loss. The wind cut more sharply tonight. Charles wandered aimlessly through the snow-laden paths of Brooksville's Central Park, his breath misting in the cold air, scarf half undone, coat unbuttoned, as if his body had forgotten how to care for itself. Children's laughter drifted from the distance. Parents strolled hand in hand beneath golden string lights. A choir near the fountain sang a heartfelt rendition of Silent Night. The world had moved on. The world was celebrating, but to Charles Whitmore, it all felt like a cruel jest. He walked until his legs ached, until the joyous sounds of merriment faded into a dull background murmur, and he discovered an empty bench beneath a leafless elm tree. Here the lights were dimmer, the snow blanketed the ground, thick, quiet, and undisturbed. He sat down slowly, shoulders hunched, hands buried deep in his coat pockets. The ache in his chest was not merely illness. It was the relentless, pounding realization of betrayal that incessantly replayed in his mind. Their voices, their laughter behind the boardroom door, the way Evelyn had said, "We've waited long enough," like vultures observing a man's weakening breath, ready to feast. His own wife, his children, blood and bone sharpened into paper-signing machines. He wiped his face with a gloved hand. His breath trembled. Was he crying? He wasn't even certain anymore. The cold had numbed his skin but not his heart. A sudden crunch of snow to his left made him stiffen. "Hey mister, are you okay?" The voice was cautious yet kind. He turned his head slightly. A boy, dark-skinned, lanky, perhaps 11 or 12, stood a few feet away, his breath fogging in the air. Behind him were 4 others, 2 boys, 2 girls, bundled in mismatched coats and boots. They held candy canes, steaming paper cups of something, and a small portable speaker playing a tinny version of Jingle Bells. Charles said nothing. The boy took a step closer. "I saw you from over there. You looked like you were kinda crying." "I'm not crying," Charles muttered. His voice cracked. "I'm just breathing heavy." "Yeah," the boy nodded. "That's cool. My name's Noah. That's Elijah, Kimani, Tasha, and Destiny." Each of the children offered a small wave or smile. Destiny, the youngest, perhaps 8, looked up at him with wide eyes, the kind that hadn't yet learned to distrust strangers. "What's your name, mister?" she asked softly. Charles stared at them for a long moment. He almost said, "None of your business." He almost stood up and walked away, but something within him, weary, scarred and bruised, sighed and let go. "Charles," he said. "Charles Whitmore." Noah raised an eyebrow. "You're like the guy on the building downtown." "Whitmore. That's you." Charles offered a bitter smile. "Used to be." Destiny stepped forward without hesitation and pulled a tissue from her coat pocket. She placed it in his gloved hand, then with bold sincerity, wrapped her tiny arms around his waist. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Charles." He froze. No one had hugged him in, he couldn't even recall. He remained motionless. Elijah gently handed him a candy cane. "Want to come to our Christmas thing? We're just up the street. It's at our group home. They have lights and cookies and Destiny made punch, but it's kind of gross." The children laughed. Charles looked at them, confused. "Why would you invite me?" Kimani shrugged. "You looked like you needed somebody." Charles opened his mouth, closed it, then without another word, stood up. He followed them through the snow, down the street, past flickering porch lights and quiet storefronts, until they reached a modest red brick building with a hand-painted sign, Brooksville Family Center. Inside, warmth enveloped him. The air smelled of cinnamon, cocoa, something faintly burnt but in a comforting way. String lights hung from the rafters. A paper tree stood in the corner, adorned with crayon ornaments. Laughter reverberated off the walls. A volunteer in a Christmas sweater looked up and smiled when the children burst in. "Hey, you brought a guest," she beamed. "Come on in, sir." They guided Charles to a couch by the window. Someone handed him a paper cup of cocoa. The children sat on the floor around his legs, chatting, joking, elbowing each other. Tasha acted as DJ for the speaker. Elijah showed him a lopsided gingerbread house he'd built. The roof caved in like the projects. Charles laughed, an honest, raspy, involuntary sound. Noah pulled a small gift-wrapped box from beneath the paper tree and handed it to him. "It's not fancy or anything, but we all made something." Inside the box was a handmade wooden keychain. "Best grandpa ever," it read in carved, slightly crooked letters. On the back was burned, "From your Christmas kids. 2025. Charles stared at it, silent. His hands trembled. Destiny climbed onto his lap without asking and leaned her head against his chest. "You smell like old money." The room erupted in laughter. Charles didn't stop her. He didn't stop the tears this time either. No cameras, no press, no shares, no trust funds. Just 5 children who didn't know what he possessed, didn't care, and gave him the only thing he hadn't purchased in decades: a seat at the table. For the first time in years, Charles Whitmore felt truly seen. And for the first time in decades, he didn't want to leave. The next morning, the snow had ceased. Sunlight pierced through the clouds, casting a silver gleam on rooftops, melting the icicles that hung from the eaves of Whitmore Manor. Charles sat in his study, still in the same clothes from the night before, the paper cup of cocoa half full on the desk, now cold. He hadn't slept, but he wasn't tired. His mind endlessly circled one impossible thought: they saw me. They didn't need a reason. They just saw me. He stared at the keychain on his desk. "Best grandpa ever." And then, after a long pause, he stood, shrugged on his coat, and without a word to Henley, walked out the front door. Brooksville Family Center appeared different in daylight. Modest, yes, but lived in, warm in its uniquely cobbled-together way. Christmas decorations still adorned the walls, handmade stars and ribbons curling at the edges. Children's laughter echoed from within. Charles stood for a moment outside the door, unsure if he had imagined it all. Last night had felt like a dream, soft at the edges, impossibly warm. But the keychain in his pocket confirmed its reality. He knocked. A middle-aged woman opened the door. Blonde, round-shouldered, with tired eyes but a quick smile. "Can I help you?" "I was here last night," Charles said. "With the kids. Noah, Elijah, Destiny." "Oh," she broke into a wide grin. "You're Mr. Charles. They haven't stopped talking about you. Destiny's been drawing you on every scrap of paper she can find." He blinked. "Is that so? Come in. I'm Meredith, the director here." She led him inside. The children were in the common room, stringing popcorn for a garland. Destiny waved so vigorously she nearly fell off her chair. "You came back." Charles smiled faintly and raised a hand in return. Meredith brought him into her office, shelves overflowing with old files and hand-labeled folders, a coffee pot that looked older than most of the furniture. She offered him a seat and a paper cup of weak brew. "I wanted to learn more about the children," Charles said carefully, folding his hands. "Those 5, they seem unusually close." Meredith's smile softened. "They are. They've been together for 3 years. They came from different homes, bounced through foster care. Parents gone, some to sickness, some to things we don't tell the little ones." She paused, her tone dropping. "They found each other here. They don't share blood, but if you ask Destiny, they're siblings. She says they're God-picked." Charles remained silent. His jaw clenched slightly. He looked away toward the window. "They all carry something," Meredith continued. "Noah feels like he has to be the man even though he's just a kid. Tasha keeps the room light even when she's scared. Kimani barely talks, but he'll draw you a cathedral from memory. Elijah, well, he wants to know how everything works. And Destiny, she's sunshine with 1,000 questions." Charles exhaled a long, slow breath. "They saved me last night without knowing they did." Meredith tilted her head. "Funny thing about children, They don't care who you were, only who you are when they need you. He left an anonymous check that day. Not massive, but sufficient for new coats, improved plumbing and working heat in all rooms. Henley, upon learning of it, asked no questions. He simply began organizing the finances. "I'll prepare a rolling donation structure under a private foundation, sir," he said, adjusting his spectacles. "And shall I assume this isn't for tax deduction?" Charles didn't smile. "This isn't for anything." From that day forward, Charles returned every week. At first, the children didn't expect him. Then they began to wait by the windows. They called it Whitmore Wednesdays. He brought board games, puzzles, stories from when gas cost 30 cents a gallon and candy bars were a nickel. But soon he did more than just entertain. He started teaching in the common room. He arranged chairs in a circle. "Today," he'd say, "we're going to learn how to argue without screaming." Or, "What's a budget? Why should you care?" Or, "If someone gives you a credit card and says it's free, what do you say?" Noah thrived. He took notes, made charts. Tasha cracked jokes but always remembered the details. Elijah once dismantled an old toaster just to see if Charles could put it back together with him. He could. Kimani didn't speak but drew a picture of the entire class. Charles at the center with "Boss" scribbled in crayon above his head. Destiny once asked, "If you could adopt us, would you?" Charles didn't answer. She didn't press. And somewhere between those Wednesdays something shifted. Charles began to smile when he woke up. He stopped checking his phone for messages from Evelyn or Clarissa. When Henley offered to prepare dinner, Charles declined and instead brought leftover lasagna to the kids. One night he told Destiny a bedtime story from memory, an old Irish folktale his mother had told him when he was 5. She fell asleep with her head on his lap. He didn't move for an hour. Henley met with Meredith discreetly. They arranged legal reviews, long-term grants, educational fund plans. Charles insisted it be kept quiet. "I'm not buying anything," he said. "They owe me nothing." Still, every Friday there would be a drawing waiting for him. A lumpy Santa, a smiling version of Charles. One time, a stick figure with a top hat labeled Mr. Money Grandpa. He kept them all. The man who once dined alone under chandeliers now sat cross-legged on carpeted floors, teaching children how to split a grocery bill and use duct tape to fix a leaky sink. And every time he left the center, every time one of them yelled, "See you next week, Charles," he found himself stopping mid-step, eyes moist, chest full of something new. Not disbelief, not guilt, but wonder and something very close to joy. The boardroom hadn't changed. The glass walls still framed the skyline like a masterpiece. The same polished mahogany table stretched down the center, a veritable runway of power. But today everything felt different. Not just because of the camera crews or the sharply dressed lawyers. Not just because of the uneasy shuffling of chairs or the carefully phrased murmurs passing between shareholders. It was because of the man standing at the head of the table. Charles Whitmore stood tall, trim, clean-shaven in a navy suit that fit perfectly, not overly opulent, not desperate to impress. His eyes were clear, his posture firm, his cane was gone. Lucas sat frozen 3 chairs down, hands steepled, knuckles white. Clarissa shifted in her seat, lips parted as if poised to interrupt, but something about her father's presence made her hesitate. Evelyn was absent. She had chosen to remain in Zurich. Charles placed a leather folder on the table and unfolded a single page. "Thank you for being here," he began. His voice was calm, deliberate, devoid of bitterness. "I know some of you expected me not to return, that I would quietly vanish. Make this easy." He paused. No one spoke. "I'm 71 years old. That used to signify legacy, stability. Now it means liability. A man out of time. A relic. At least that's how some of you perceive it." He looked directly at Lucas, "And some of my own family." Lucas blinked once. "I'm not here to argue. I'm here to explain." He slid the paper across the table. "This is my revised will. Effective immediately." A lawyer leaned forward and began to read aloud. As the words filled the room, the atmosphere transitioned from curiosity to disbelief to absolute silence. "I am stepping down from all operations. Whitmore Logistics will be managed by a non-family executive board, effective this quarter. My shares, controlling and otherwise, will be placed into a foundation, 60% under a new nonprofit called Brooksville tomorrow." There were murmurs now. One board member leaned toward another. Did he say 60? Charles continued. Brooksville tomorrow will serve orphan children and education initiatives in underserved communities. It will not be branded. It will not bear my name on buildings. It will simply operate quietly. Clarissa's eyes narrowed, her hand twitching. Lucas's jaw locked, but he remained motionless. 30% will go directly to the Brooksville Family Center to develop life skills training, mental health support and staff development. I spent time there. I've learned more in 3 months at that center than in 30 years of board meetings. He allowed that to sink in. And the final 10%, he said, looking straight at his children now, will be divided between my 2 biological children on one condition. A silence more definitive than a gavel. You will each be required to complete a full year of supervised volunteer service in underserved communities, 1 domestic, 1 abroad. No assistance. No press. No exceptions. You will live like those you claim to understand. If you complete it, the funds are yours. If not, they revert back into the foundation. Lucas stood. This is blackmail. Charles turned toward him slowly. No, son. This is fatherhood. Clarissa didn't speak. Her eyes had dropped to the grain of the table. Charles straightened the papers, clipped them together and handed them to his lawyer. It's notarized, effective immediately. And one last matter, he said almost as an afterthought. As of last week, I am now the legal guardian of 5 children. Their names are Noah, Elijah, Tasha, Kamani, and Destiny. They will live with me. They are not my replacement family. They are simply family. He gathered his coat. You don't have to understand. You just have to respect it. He walked out without another word. 1 year later, the snow returned, blanketing Brooksville in white, just as it had before. But this time Whitmore Manor glowed from within. Laughter spilled through every window like music. The once cold halls were filled with the aroma of cookies, pine, and old jazz records spinning on vinyl. In the living room, 5 children danced in socked feet on polished floors. Noah was meticulously setting the table. Tasha wore antlers and kept everyone laughing with her exaggerated French accent. Kamani, as quiet as ever, sketched them all from the staircase. Elijah continually adjusted the speaker, attempting to enhance the bass. Destiny wore a crown made of red ribbon and declared herself Queen of Christmas. And Charles? He was at the heart of it all, wearing a hand-knitted scarf over his blazer, with Destiny on his lap and Coco in his hand. The clock struck 8. A soft knock sounded at the front gate. Clarissa stood outside alone, bundled in a beige coat. She held a small wrapped package in both hands. Her breath was short, nervous. For a long moment she didn't press the gate buzzer, but it opened anyway. Henley stepped aside. He said, "You might come." She nodded, eyes glassy, and entered slowly. Charles looked up for a moment. Nothing moved. Clarissa walked forward and held out the gift with both hands. "It's not much," she said softly. "Made it myself." Charles stared at her, then at the box, then back at her face. The lines that hadn't been there last year, the quiet apology living in her eyes. He took the gift and then he opened his arms. Clarissa stepped into his embrace. The fire crackled. The clock chimed again. Outside, fireworks exploded above the snow-covered trees, bright and bold and full of hope. Inside, the past and the present stood together, no longer afraid of what might come next.